Mini camp is over. What did we learn from mini camp that will show up in 2025? On today's episode, we wrap up the off-season program and project those lessons forward into the coming season.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey. Yeah. Ain't no errors, baby. It's a new era. I wake up early feeling rich like I'm cash.
Welcome in another episode of Sounds Gouda. Thank you, everybody, for coming back and taking a listen to us. Of course, and as always, I'm one of your two co-hosts. My name is Rob Ralph. Next to me is my best friend, Jordan Olson. We are excited for any new and returning listeners. Just know that we do have new content every Wednesday and Saturday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So please, if you can, make sure to like, sub, and follow us on those platforms as you are able. Also wanted to let you know that we're going to be trying something new. Every 50 subscribers here moving forward, we're going to give away a piece of Sounds Gouda swag. So as you can see, Jordan and I are both donning the epic Sounds Gouda hat. And we're even trying to talk about some t-shirts and some other stuff as well. So how it'll work will be once we hit 600 subscribers. So currently we're at 562. So that is 38 away if anybody can do some basic math. We will do a random drawing. You do have to be a public subscriber, right? Like if we don't know how to find you or get a hold of you, we can't send you stuff. So just know that you got to be a public subscriber. If you have been listening and you're interested, make sure to sub. Hopefully you are public and we can send you some sweet stuff from Sounds Gouda. So definitely appreciate you guys helping us out to get up to these new levels. But going back to the Packers stuff, Jordan, as I alluded to, mini camp wrap up is getting through, and there's a lot of different stories and narratives. But let's start with this one. We all know it's going to be a dogfight there towards the end for the wide receiver competition, right? Not counting your starters. So the Packers are deciding to try some new stuff. They are trying out Bo Melton at cornerback. Are the Packers insane, or are they just ahead of the curve?
I don't know that they're flirting with insanity, but, I think that there's been a lot of talk over the last week now about Bo Melton. And, I give the guy credit for going out there and trying a new position. As many players and coaches have stated, your availability is your best ability, right? And when it comes down to, the back end of this roster, wide receiver 5'6", corner 5'6", they're going to be looking for guys who can do a lot of different things. And I really think that's what this old Bo Melton experiment is about. I mean, anybody that thinks that he's going to become the second coming of Deion Sanders, all of a sudden, I think we need to hold the phone on that. And I think for most level-headed Packers fans and media out there, that's the note that they're, or the tone that they're taking. But, they did have him out there on all 3 days, and from some reporting and some videos and stuff, he wasn't looking too bad. He was looking pretty natural in some of his dropbacks, made some good cuts on, breaks on balls. So, I think it's pretty cool that he's going to give it a try. And I think the whole thought is, his brother is pretty good at this, right? I mean, I think Rob and I were both pounding the table for us to draft Max Melton last season, going into last, NFL draft. And, I think that he's got somebody cool to lean on, pick up the phone and say, hey, Max, tell me a little bit about that corner position, right? I could imagine those two growing up going at it as well, trying to best each other. I'm sure it wasn't always just Bo playing wide receiver and Max playing, corner in that position. So, we'll be able to see about the transition. I don't know. What are your thoughts about this experiment and how do you project that into what we'll see in 2025 on the field?
Hard to say. I think they're trying out some stuff with him. He does look the part. There's no doubt. But as we were talking about, before we started to hit record on this, we think that he'll do pretty good in man-to-man, but with zone concepts and drops and different stuff, that's where he could probably utilize a little bit more coaching and that stuff, right? So he does have a lot of, family ties, for cornerback position as well to be able to lean on for sure. So I don't think it hurts. I think that there's still a lot to be worked out, but I guess for me, I'd be a little shocked if that ends up, coming to fruition and he is like our back end depth cornerback guy, but I guess you never really know.
Yeah, I was listening to the interview that they had with Tucker Kraft, I think maybe at the end of day one or day two of mini camp here. And, as we talked about, or you just alluded to, you know, Tucker Kraft had some pretty good points in there. Like he sees that ability for him to translate that. He's already playing on some coverage units and special teams, right? And that translates well to the man-to-man coverage downfield. So, I think that probably gave them a lot of hope that he's capable of doing that. So, as you said, it'll be some of those other nuances and things that will really determine whether that's going to be something we actually see in a regular season game, coming up this season. So, I just like Bo. And one other thing about Bo is, the coaching staff and the players seem to be enamored with the type of guy that he is, the locker room presence, his versatility, and in mini camps too, he was playing on all four special teams units as well. So I really admire the fact that he's willing to go out there and do whatever he can to earn a spot on this Packers team. And I think that's going to pay dividends, but he's going to have to compete against McCole Hardman, who obviously has special teams versatility. And if Malik Heath wants to have a shot at making this roster at all, he's going to need to show that he's more than a big body guy who can block and make some occasional possession things. So, we'll talk about Cornelius Johnson a little later on. Well, shoot, maybe we'll talk about him right now. Cornelius Johnson is a guy, since we're talking about wide receivers, who really had a good mini camp, really showed up and made some plays, according to reporters and people that were there at practice. Throughout multiple touchdown receptions, not only from Malik Willis, but then from Taylor Elgersma on day 3. So, with that being said, if Bo Melton is the sixth guy, Hardman and Heath may be subjected to waivers. Good chance that one or both of those guys don't make it back to the practice squad. So the emergence of somebody like Cornelius Johnson to be a practice squad guy, somebody that knows the offense, that has a little bit of upside if you have an injury situation and you're down some guys. So Cornelius Johnson really could be a guy that actually makes an appearance in 2025 and makes gets a couple practice squad call-ups. Hopefully not that I'm not pulling for Cornelius Johnson, but if that's the case, we probably have a couple injury holes that we're filling. So yeah, and then we'll see what happens when Watson comes back. But I think the wide receiver position has been and will continue to be one of the focal points of Packers conversation this offseason until those rosters are finalized.
I just, thinking about this upcoming season and the possibility of having Bo Melton pick sixes or interceptions or different stuff just gets me really excited, as well too. I'm sure would be for Packers fandom, but just want to use a little bit of caution here on this, that there's still a lot of stuff to play out, but that would be pretty awesome to see that narrative actually come into play. And if he did end up making it and he was getting in some reps there in cornerback during the season, to have stuff like that happen would be pretty cool. So
Yeah, and we were talking too, and we won't spend too much of the whole episode talking about Bo Melton, but Rob's like, hey, like, when has this happened before? Has anybody been able to successfully make that transition? A little research, I got this name from Andy Herman's podcast, so it's not my own research, but there's not many examples of guys in the middle of their NFL career transitioning and making that step from wide receiver to corner. Not notably, anyways, right? But Troy Brown, former 15-year New England Patriot, he did it at age 33. So completely kind of different stories. He had been a very successful NFL wide receiver, aging at the time. I think, I don't know the story there, if the coaching staff asked him to do that, if he wanted to do that, what led to that. He had a pretty good season in 2004 when he transitioned there. I think he had 3 interceptions and 5 passes deflected, 2 fumble recoveries. So, as an aging veteran player, he was able to make that transition. So, you're talking about Bo Melton being a 26-year-old and the peak of his physical prowess right now. It's a storyline to follow, and would be a unique story if he was able to do that. So we will transition out of that, though. A couple other big lessons from camp or things that I kind of took away is, this offensive line versatility is going to be tested this year, and I really hope it's not tested as a result of Elton Jenkins holding out through training camp and ultimately the future not working out with him. Um, but there's a lot of nuance to that. Um, we discovered, in some cap research that we did, and I know there's a little bit of information out there about it. His contract is in a pretty good position from an annual value perspective. I mean, he will be the highest paid center if he plays center for the Packers for the next 2 years. The problem is that, with such a high cap hit next year and the Packers have little commitment to him, that they could move on from him to save that money to invest it in other younger players. And I think that's what's causing him to have this concern, right? So, what are the Packers' options? They hold all the leverage, but, him and his camp are really probably going to want to see an additional year added to that contract. So there is some guaranteed money in 2026 and potentially spread out some of that money to 2027, really kind of solidifying it from the Packers' perspective. You got a guy who's going to be 30 years old at some point in time this season. That is a high cap hit. I don't think that they're going to be too eager to invest in a guy then through, age 32, especially when we haven't seen him play any center at the NFL level. Now, he did play a lot of center in college, a little bit of backup, or fill-in versatility. Obviously, when we saw him out there against the Philadelphia Eagles with, I don't know how much practice time he was getting, the conditions were what they were, but I don't anticipate that. I think he's going to look a lot better than that when he gets out there and as a starter. But if he goes through training camp and holds out, that's going to be a tough spot for this team. So I don't know, like, where do you think that puts the Packers, Rob, in terms of this Elton Jenkins saga? And maybe what does that mean for this offensive line group if Elton Jenkins is a member of this team or maybe not a member of this team?
Yeah, well, it's really a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation because he's doing you a favor too, right? And taking his experience and his strength at left guard and moving to center and doing the Packers a deed in that route. But then you made all the good points too of what the Packers are able to do and utilize and getting to some more, young talent. It puts Jacob Monk right in kind of the spotlight as that next kind of, I guess, that next man up. You also have Ryan there too, as well, who's got experience. So that I would assume that he would probably be the backup. But even with Aaron Banks not playing, and at least in day one, you had Morgan at left tackle, you had Jennings at left guard, and then you had Monk at center. Ryan at right guard, and then of course Zach Tom at right tackle. So it tests some of your backups, right? And but also too it gives them a lot of experience as well. So I could see that the Packers holding ground to what they would want to do, and giving some of these other players some reps and some competition. But I really do think it would come down to Jacob Mock, Ryan as well too, to be able to step in and play center and backup center too. So I wouldn't like it as far as like a depth piece goes and would have definitely some concerns there at center. But if Monk ends up playing really well, he gets that experience. Nothing's more valuable than game time playing experience, right? So maybe he just comes in and just nails the position right away, or at least holds it down pretty well. Then you feel pretty good. And the Packers would save a lot of money. But I mean, I really do hope that they can come to a meet in the middle situation for sure. And then, by hopefully not too far into training camp, they can figure something out and Elton Jenkins can be on this team at least for another year, if not more.
Yeah, I think that the Mock and Ryan and the combinations that you have available to you are very interesting, right? Like they signed Banks, they brought in Anthony Belton, John Williams, they have a lot of versatility and frankly, you're the best version of your team if you have Elton Jenkins playing on that offensive line. I think right now from what we've seen, he's probably the second best guy on that unit. But they're certainly probably going to give Monk as much opportunity as they can to get experience there. But I wonder if this goes through training camp, if they actually because part of this equation from the day one starters is that we didn't have Rasheed Walker, practicing throughout mini camp. I think there's some injury stuff there, but so then you go to have Morgan at left tackle. But if you have a healthy Rasheed Walker, we got to remember that Jordan Morgan, nearly won that right guard job out of camp last year. So I got to wonder if that pushes Ryan to be the starting center, and then you really have an offensive line room that looks like a starting group that looks like Rasheed Walker and Banks, Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom as your starting five. But you can see from this configuration in minicamp, this is probably almost the backup to that situation. So, in an event where you have one injury, you have an injury at left tackle, that's probably your starting five, then Morgan, Banks, Monk, Ryan, and Tom. So, you throw in Anthony Belton. I really think that if this doesn't work out and it gets ugly and we get into another Jair Alexander situation, that at that point in time, I think the Packers could get a day two pick for Elton Jenkins, and you'd really have to consider that. You do move off of his contract for next year, which is really where the root of this whole conversation it is. But let's just say somebody really wants, a guard still in their prime that has versatility. You could get a day two pick, and that would be pretty enticing for the Packers. It wouldn't be the depth plan that they built, but I still see five competent starters across that room and some depth, and then you throw in Donovan Jennings that played at guard a lot this week. They still are talking pretty highly of him. John Williams didn't play in mini camp. But, and then you talk about who's our guy, Cooper from Minnesota, too. We talked about him being a guy earlier after the draft and undrafted free agents as a guy to watch that could make this offensive line room as the 10th guy or be a high practice squad. So you have depth and versatility to allow you to do that if this really gets ugly.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation and a little bit more drama going on the Packers offseason than we'd liked. But yeah, I really do hope that they get something shored up with Jenkins. But totally can understand that other piece of it too as well. So it's a business for sure. Jenkins is getting there. He's getting a little bit older, so I totally understand not wanting to put some more contract years on a aging player. But man, I would really love it if he were on the team this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just an interesting note from minicamp too. I don't know, I'm kind of over talking about the Jair Alexander of it all. We still don't know where he's gonna be. Still hope he's not gonna be a Minnesota Viking or a Philadelphia Eagle. There's still some of the rumors about some destinations for him out there. But and Goody addressing that situation on day one, the financials of that all are really interesting. And he says he's going to use that money to make some upcoming transactions. And immediately, I think you have a lot of eyebrows raised. Are they going to trade for somebody like Hendrickson? Now we have the perfect amount of money to trade for him. I know there's a lot of conversation there, but I really think that means they're probably going to take care of a couple of in-house guys. We mentioned it on a previous episode, but the NFL uses the carryover cap, so that money can be spent this year, but if we don't spend it, it can be spent next year. And one thing that hasn't been addressed yet, and Goody is, when he says he's going to do something publicly, whether it's subtle or not, he's pretty much a man of his word, right? All the Jair Alexander stuff, he was pretty, ho-hum about that. Well, he's a member of this team right now. He said all this stuff that was non-committal, but who he was very committal about was Quay Walker. He said he was going to take care of him and he was going to be a Packer for a while, right? So he hasn't touched that contract. Obviously they declined the 5th-year option because it's a little too rich for that position, but he would be a person now with some of this free money that I could see them taking care of. They've got to take care of Zach Tom. They got to take care of a lot of guys in the next 2 years if they want to maintain this core. So I really think that money is just going to be spent on securing, this most recent, couple of years of drafts and keeping that core around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's the smart Packers way of doing things. So yeah, I mean, you're spot on. Quay Walker contract, Zach Tom, obviously, probably prime candidate numero uno. I know they did pick up the Devontae Wyatt's fifth year, but got to be thinking about him too, depending on how he plays, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things that they could do, could shore up and take. They historically, the Packers take care of their players and draft and develop in house first. So I do not think at all we're going to see a trade for Hendrickson or anything like that. So just want to put some rational thoughts as far as that stuff goes, and know that be keeping a lot of our players too that are deserving of these contracts first and foremost.
Yeah, and the Packers did, they filled just to totally put a bow on the Alexander situation. They did fill his roster spot with Cameron Young, a defensive lineman that was drafted in 2023 by the Seahawks in the fourth round. So he did play 17 games in 2 years. He had one start. I really don't know what his spot is on this team. He's going to have to compete with the likes of Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. Maybe he just ends up on the practice squad, but they did add another defensive lineman to have some depth there. I'll be interested to see what Cameron Young can be on this team right now. He's just depth. But Goody's pretty good at finding these guys that people get rid of. You look to Rasul Douglas and some of those other ones, and they're pretty good at scouting out those guys as a fit on this team. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops. One other major theme, and then we'll maybe touch on a couple other little notes, but I mean, super high level QB play throughout minicamp, and I think that most media likes to, obviously gas up as many people as they can, but like Jordan Love looks sharp by all, reports and anything you saw from him. You had Malik Willis coming in and some of these team drills. He looked sharp. Even Taylor Elgersma was throwing some lasers out there on day 3. And he has got a lot to learn, but you like the talent level that you were able to see in the reports about what, the Packers saw in him. I think these quarterbacks, specifically Love and Willis, are gonna start to get really comfortable in this system. And I think it's gonna show in 2025. I mean, what did you hear about the quarterbacks and team period and stuff like that made you,
Well, yeah, I mean, they're rounding into form, and with a lot of the, hey, we didn't get high cornerback, draft capital in this year's draft. What you really did is got an insert into some juice, into some fire for that offense. So that's what makes me really excited. Matthew Golden, you touched on the Cornelius piece earlier, but even, McCole Hardman coming there, bringing some speed, doing some really awesome McCole Hardman long 74-yard touchdown, taking it to the house type of things is just extremely exciting. So getting some repetition with those guys, you always love a quarterback coming in here like Algersma to be able to come in and get some good reps too as well. And sounds like he's got a cannon for an arm too. But I'm pretty excited for Jordan Love and what he can do with this new built offense and speed this year. And even Malik Willis, right? Like how he shined and what his role will be in this upcoming year too, as well, if they have any certain types of packages, or even obviously, of course, if anything happens to Love, he's shown more than being capable of coming in and being more comfortable in this offense in this year too. And so I'm really excited for both Jordan Love and Malik Willis to continue to ride this good momentum at the training camp and see where that takes us.
So, Rob, which camp do you lean into? And maybe you don't have to have this answer yet, but if Malik Willis is on fire in training camp and somebody offers a fourth round pick for Malik Willis, and Elgersma looks pretty good given he's got a lot to learn, do you trade Malik Willis, or are you in the camp of like, we're going for a Super Bowl? We need that injury, insurance for at any point in time during the season. We don't want this to be a wash, so are you taking a third or a fourth round pick for Malik Willis? Or, is this a Super Bowl window and are you holding on to him and, no matter what, to let it ride out this season and give you that chance? Because, the injury bug can strike at any point in time. It would be a terrible thing to go into a playoff game and have an injury and then have to start a project guy like Elgersma out there. I mean, you're not feeling too optimistic about that situation.
Yeah, I would hold on to Malik Willis. I understand that you could get some decent draft capital depending on how he plays right, and also depending on injury. But I mean, as we know, just from spotlight into last year, if it weren't for Malik Willis, we wouldn't have even made it to the playoffs, right? So having that insurance is just so extremely valuable. I'd be on the side of keeping him. I think he's too good of a player, and honestly, like, he's got the talent. You're putting him in a good system with good coaches. Definitely let Jordan Love do his thing. I would be curious to see if they have any sort of packages or different types of things that they could do with him. We'll have to see as far as that stuff goes, but yeah, I would be on the side of keeping Malik Willis if I were the Green Bay Packers.
Huh. Yeah, we didn't see a whole lot of that, but that would be fun to see some, wildcat packages where he's out there as a running back, or like the Packers put him out there in like a 21 personnel situation where you have like Josh Jacobs and Malik Willis winged
Yeah,
off of Jordan Love. I mean, like,
yeah,
that sounds like Matt LaFleur's, fantasy right there. And then he put Savion Williams on the field too, and the big slot. I mean, I am disappointed that Savion Williams was wearing that red non-contact jersey all through camp. Not that these guys are going out there and doing stuff, but I think that certainly limited what he was able to maybe show in mini camp and kind of build upon some of that excitement of what we hope Savion Williams can be. So we'll have to wait until training camp to get some more hype around Savion Williams. So, um, some other reports of some guys that I think we're hoping develop to really round out this team. I heard from a couple Packers media people, podcasters, that Tyron Hopper was looking pretty sharp and coming into some form. So maybe that investment will pay off. The linebacker room with Isaiah Simmons, and we haven't even talked about him yet. There's going to be heavy competition there for linebacker 5. You brought back Christian Welch, which is a special teams ace. That's going to be very interesting to watch moving forward. A lot of talk about Luke Musgrave looking more comfortable. Looks like things are starting to slow down for him. You didn't necessarily see him trying to run so hard and trip himself up just trying to go, light speed. But imagine if Luke Musgrave, stays healthy and comes to light in this offense as well. So, and Tucker Kraft built upon his, season last year. He had a couple good passes and connections with Jordan Love. And man, I would really love if Tucker Kraft just becomes that Jason Witten type of security blanket for Jordan Love. And in that interview I referenced earlier too, he really talked about wanting to attack the defense downfield. He's really working on his man separation. That's the part of his game that he really wants to elevate this year, is kind of having the feel for when he's going to settle down versus, having the moves in his route to be able to separate and take that vertical seam. And I'm really excited for Tucker Kraft, but I don't think I'm alone in that. So
no, not at all. I mean, he's already, breaking out. So I really do feel like, and I'm sure to you as well, like he's got George Kittle potential, just to be an elite tight end. That's just the tight end that he reminds me of. I don't think he's there quite yet. George Kittle, I know that's quite the high ceiling, but that's definitely something I think that's right in the realm of what he could do and already is doing, especially from this last year with his offense. So yeah, you get Musgrave in there, being healthy, being able to run routes and stay on his feet, and bringing another element with Tucker Kraft in there, being able to do some things. Yeah, I'm really loving how this tight end group is going to be shaping up here for this next year if everybody can stay healthy.
we mentioned Isaiah Simmons, but he had some pretty positive things to say about Jeff Hafley and the plan to kind of get him to focus at the linebacker position, work at Sam and Will and get comfortable there. What were your thoughts about, him speaking to the press and kind of what the Packers' plans are for him?
Well, he's got a lot of pedigree, right? Draft capital. He has so much versatility that it was kind of hard for him to stick and really specialize and get really good at one spot. I think it's very interesting that, like, even when he was with the Giants, he played most of those snaps at safety, right? And then now you come in with a defensive guru, really good mind, and he's like, "Hey, no, you need to be playing linebacker for us," and really hone in on that. So I don't know if it's a malpractice of what Isaiah Simmons, his potential and what he could do, and that kind of being maybe his, I don't know what you'd want to call it, like kryptonite, like being able to do so much as a tweener, as a hybrid type of player. But getting him to really, hone in and be really good in those linebacker spots, coverage, tackling, and just being able to do everything that position commands, which is a lot in the NFL. There's no doubt about that. And not splitting him back and forth, I think could do, quite a bit. He's very rangy, very athletic. So if Hafley finds the key to unlocking Isaiah Simmons finally, this will be absolutely incredible and will give us multiple stars in every line of this defense. And it'll have some really fun and unique packages and blitz specifically, I'm thinking of too, for this upcoming year for what you could do for people like Isaiah Simmons, who's got a lot of athletic ability, and Colin Oliver, who we just drafted, who's got a ton of speed and other elements to that, to his game as well. So I'm pretty excited and excited to see what Half can do with him.
Mm-hmm. You heard it here first. Jeff Hafley, defensive guru. So Rob's ready to anoint him, and I'm in for it. I think we got, we need to build off of last season, but I certainly think the arrow is pointing well in the upward direction there. So, and if he does do that, he resurrects Isaiah Simmons' career and he becomes a stud in this defense. Yeah. Like I said, you heard it here first from Rob Ralph, Jeff Hafley, defensive guru. Got some weird numbers though, like Matthew Golden becomes a star, number 22, wide receiver. And then you've got Isaiah Simmons out there at linebacker at 28. It's, numbers in this league are getting a little weird for my taste, but it doesn't matter to me as long as you're balling out. So just two other items of note, and then we'll get you out of here. You've been listening to us ramble on, long enough, but we're about to enter a period of time where we're not going to be able to talk about anything we saw on the field for a little while here. So we're probably relishing in talking a little bit about some stuff we saw at practice, because then we're waiting until July and training camp to officially start. But Nate Hobbs didn't play much, but he played on day 3 or practiced on day 3 of mini camp. He did come out, looked pretty good, had a pass breakup on a pass intended for Matthew Golden, so we'll see what Hobbs looks like a little bit more when we get to training camp. Really cool that McManus ended the practice with a 58-yarder, so they put a lot of pressure on him. Matt LaFleur did. They said if he makes this, practice is going to end. And he went out there and he nailed it. So that's great. And it's so nice to be going into an off season and not be talking about, the kicker position and worrying about the kicker position. And however you feel about McManus, it sounds like he's pretty grateful for a restart and a second chance with the Packers. So, and then lastly, like, really cool moment with Mark Murphy getting his send off. The team gave him a helmet, super cool. Little sentiment by Matt LaFleur bringing him out there and giving him a chance to, essentially address the team in his last, practice as the Packers president. So then he broke the team down, and it was a Super Bowl in that breakdown chant. So he says he sees something special. I hope that even if Mark's not in charge, he's had his fingerprints and blueprint all over. Not necessarily all the player personnel, because that's Goody's job, but I think he's certainly done a great job as the Packers president, bringing the draft. All the work he's done with Lambeau. So he's been a big part of that culture and who the Green Bay Packers are, in 2025. So pretty cool. But that's all we got for you, Packers fans. So just remember, more great content from Sounds Gouda will continue throughout the off season every Wednesday and Saturday. So thanks for listening. Make sure to share with your family, friends, other Packers fans. If you want a Sounds Gouda hat, you can log on to YouTube and subscribe with your mom's YouTube account. We'd appreciate that. Get your mom listening. But you can connect with us on X at Sounds Gouda. Rob's at Sounds Gouda with 3 A's, and I'm at Olson Jord. But until next time, Packers Nation, have a Gouda morning, a Gouda afternoon, and a Gouda night. Go Pack.
Go Pack.
Been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up.